Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 241. Today's topic, 5 tips to make your storytelling more compelling. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back. I am the nearly musical Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I am the tired and confused Michael Miller.
And fortunately for Michael, hanging out with me does not really help with confusion. No, I like to add to it.
Yeah, it does. It's you definitely. I'd say compound it.
I did the Ancestry DNA test, and I am 22% Loki. Just saying.
I'm jealous. Because I came out 35% quadratic equation. So I don't know what to do with that.
Well, we should just simplify that. High school algebra.
Very well done. I'm really excited about this episode. You shot me the show notes for this the other day, and I was too busy because I actually wanted to call you and talk about it. But this is great. I love doing these ones where it's some concise information that some either novice may not have considered, or if you're in the midst of a project, sometimes it's easy to get lost in the sauce and not think about some simple steps that will really help you craft a better story. And that's what this episode is all about, which is awesome. I love it.
It's really inspired because, and I don't know if I had a ticker, I don't know what it would be up to right now, but like in the group or chatting to people online when I get contacted a lot of times when people want to chat about world building and storytelling, which is really cool. If you ever want to do it, just do it. But the thing that is people are, especially newer people who are typically making the leap to something where they're going to share either through a novel or something they want to do with people, they start getting very nervous on their storytelling skills specifically, and other things too. But for what we're talking about here, it's the storytelling, and one of the big things is they're always worried if their stories are compelling. And I want to just want to say first off, the only judge of people whether or not your story is compelling is the audience. You know, if you're writing middle-aged fantasy fiction or young adult fantasy fiction, what is compelling is different than if it's adult fiction. This is why knowing if you're going to share your story, you have to know your audience. It's great if you have gamers because you kind of know them.
We'll complete that thought. I didn't want to interrupt you. So
yeah, no, that was pretty much it.
Oh, okay. You mentioned the group, and before we got rolling too hard, I just wanted to drop.
Yeah, my larger point with that is it's like if you're a game master, it's simpler because you want to get feedback as you're giving a story, but you know your players at a table, especially after a couple sessions, or if you play with them long term, you really know players at a table. But when it's for people who like you're going to share it out with who you don't know, which is a little bit more scary. It doesn't really even matter what you think. You know all of the flaws and the problems in your stories, and you've probably read over it several times. You might even be sick of it by the time it gets released, which is fun. But ultimately, it's the reaction of the people who it's targeted to as an audience.
That I find that can be an interesting and also difficult quality to deal with when you're working with a project that you're revamping and going over because you're rereading it and you're going through it and you're going through it so many times that you start to things that might be a big reveal start to feel, to you because you're so aware of it. Whereas and the impact of it is sometimes lost on you while you're in the creation process because you don't have that fresh perspective. So it can be difficult. So I find that an interesting quality when you're working on a large project. Like
say if you're really worried, that's where you get people to do testing.
Yeah.
And they'll give you the feedback and you'll go, this part of the story is slow. And that's not, oh my goodness, throw it away. That's, let me just change the way it works there a little bit, add a little bit more meat in, and go into maybe some of these 5 tips that we're about to go into here.
what's funny is when Dawn was writing her first book, I have multiple copies of that book digitally, pre-publish.
Yeah.
That were modified at different times, and I don't know. I'm confident there are scenes that I have that no one else has read except other readers for her like me.
Yeah, the other early readers. Yeah.
Right. Like, and I know there's some scenes that I was like, oh, that's so great, that might not be in the book, or that were modified based on various input. So test readers is a big help. It's a big help to the process.
But that in itself is a different episode. So let's hop in to these 5 very important life-saving tips. Well, fictional life-saving tips.
Story-saving tips.
Well, I don't know about the fictional lives, because like your story's not compelling. You feel like you need to kill someone. Or maybe that's just my reaction to everything in storytelling.
Well, sometimes that's the answer, Jeff. Sometimes axing a character is absolutely the way to go.
But that is not actually one of the official tips here. So.
Not the official tips.
So what is our first tip there, Michael?
Official tip number 1 has most of the tips have like the tip and then have like subcategories. So this one's got 2 subcategories, and the tip is more depth to your characters.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's real easy to say that.
Yes.
I think the important thing is to know the place of the character and then where and how you create the depth. So, like, if you have characters, and you've said this before on a prior episode, where you've got, Joe Schmo guard who the hero is just going to sneak by. Like, you don't need to go in a 5-page backstory on Joe Schmo. You know?
When I'm talking about like characters, I mean characters who are important in a scene or throughout the book.
Yeah. And you don't need to share all of their depth with the reader.
No. Oh, God.
You should know their depth, and you should allude and imply. And I find a lot of times that when you're reading a story and a character gives off this gravitas that the story doesn't quite tell you all this stuff.
It doesn't tell you the guy has gravitas.
It doesn't.
You see it in the reactions of the other characters.
Yes, you get it. And a lot of times what's going on there is that the writer knows a lot of things, and there is depth there that they haven't shared the exact stuff, but they've built it in. It's kind of like ripples. Okay, so imagine a rock, an invisible rock. The invisible rock is the character. You don't need to know how big the rock is. When someone throws it in the water and you see these huge splash and all these huge ripples, you know the rock was big.
Yes.
That's kind of what we mean, not by depth, but by reaction. So like if the reactions of characters and how the environment evolves around the character, that can allude to depth. I think when we say depth to characters, I mean, you got to share some of it. You got to talk about why this guy, like Kratos. Kratos is a great example. Kratos in the first God of War was all vengeance and fury. And honestly, for the first like 3-4 games, he was all vengeance and fury. And you're like, this guy is so angry. Like, he's just personified angry. And the performance in that is excellent. The writing's really good. When you finally find out why he is that way, you're like, oh my gosh, it's such a gut punch, and it's all justified. It's all, you buy it all. At least I did. Whereas there's other times where a character is like, super angry and whatever, but the character has no depth, so you don't buy it, and you feel like everybody's reaction is unjustified, and it pulls me out.
Yeah, and that's part of it, and that's stuff you really need feedback for to see if you're persuading with. I know sometimes I've seen characters who are meant to be one way, but they come across, a lot of times it's like they're trying to show them as sort of like a bad boy, and with
that's
a bad boy characters.
Classic example.
What happens is if they don't do them right, they sound like a whiny boy. They're a whiny boy in a leather jacket, and you're just like, it didn't work. And the thing is, feedback from other people is really good for that. But, I think really kind of where I was going with the depth of more characters is especially in fantasy, sometimes we get caught into sort of the classic tropes of a paladin or a fighter or a rogue, or the certain like
or the villainous
archetypes,
or the villainous necromancer, or the classic advisor to the king who's actually got his own evil plans, right?
And the thing is, you can use those kind of characters, but if all of your characters end up being that way, there is no depth to them. Compelling characters draw people in, and the depth allows them to connect to the character the way you want them to. So if you want them to be villainous, and you can get very heavy-handed with this too, but it's like, they walk into the orphanage and kill everyone, and then they go to another orphanage and they kill everyone. You keep doing that, it becomes heavy-fisted. But the thing is, you can show it in other ways, villainous natures. But, the thing is, try and attack things from different angles, but add layers in there. I'm not a very big person for 100% good or 100% bad. The hard line of good versus evil. For me, the devil's always in the details, and sometimes good people do bad things, and sometimes bad people do good things. And that process of exploring that, to me, is what's interesting.
See, my villain just walks out of the orphanage drinking an orphan smoothie.
Yeah. Delicious.
Everything is said. It's all said in that one thing.
Yeah, he's pretty good guy. Let's see. I like flawed heroes too. I don't think you actually said what you have written there as number one. You wrote villain. I threw in a couple ideas here. One's a villain with a soft spot. So it's like, and I shouldn't talk about the Thanos one because we haven't had that official discussion yet. But
no, it's just we'll get to that. We're going to have the last word.
We'll have the last word on that.
Jeff. Spoiler: Jeff has finally watched Infinity War. Yes. And we are finally going to get to the Infinity War episode.
If you haven't watched it yet, and you're going to listen to the next episode, I would get to it.
That I wanted to do months ago, right after the movie, because I saw it opening night, or within the first 2 or 3 days anyway. And we could not do it because Jeff and now all of our opinions are out there on the internet because there are other people's opinions too. Whatever, we're going to rehash them. I don't care.
But the good thing is I don't actually read any of that stuff. I don't have time anymore. So I'll think it's all original, and people are like, that is so old. This other theory.
We've read that on the Nerdist, Jeff.
But I think that's a good one. Adding spots to evil people that make them not so evil, and make the readers question and think about this character. That's the important thing, because that's what pulls them in.
Can you think of an example of a villain with a soft spot
besides Thanos? Let's see. Thanos from the comic books had a spot for death.
I don't know that I qualify that as a soft spot, though. He was in love.
He was in love, but that's a soft spot, right? That's something that goes against the classic villain nature, and that's what I mean by a soft spot.
Villains can't be in love.
Not when you have the horribly horrible villain, which Thanos is, right? He's the classic twist the mustache kind of evil character, but then he's in love with another character in the comics. Yeah. Darth Vader with his family. That was his soft spot. So there are lots of examples of characters like this, and it works. Now, in some books where it's really gray between good and evil, it will naturally be there. But I'm saying really with your classically evil characters, make them have things that aren't naturally evil. It's maybe, and it doesn't have to be other people. Maybe he loves doing origami, and he'll sit down and he'll pause and reflect and make these very delicate, intricate things. And, just as a way to flesh him out and add more to him, and something that isn't just him, twirling the mustache and blowing up churches.
I like if you have a villain who is working on a grand plan. You take a look at a villain who is like trying to take over a continent, or trying to, annihilate an entire people, or just some big thing like that. you're not going to do that overnight unless the story is simply he is trying to acquire X item that will allow him to do it quickly.
Yeah.
Then he could do it overnight. My point for mentioning a grand task is that it takes a lot of planning and machinations, which means patience.
Mm-hmm.
If you know anyone that has a lot of patience, people who have a lot of patience tend to have patient hobbies.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Patient hobbies are great for depth. Like,
and that's a great way of helping show the character and not say what the character is.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So the second one you have written down here is the flawed hero.
Mm-hmm.
Also a classic.
Also a classic. And the first one that comes to mind here is Sir Lancelot.
Good one. Very good one.
I mean, there's a couple different flaws in the character. The whole Guinevere thing you could kind of call a flaw. He would.
Yeah, that's like his biggest flaw, if you ask me. I mean, what?
Well, he was also a berserker. So in combat, he would lose control to the point where you kind of didn't want to be in his way, whoever you were. Because since he was so good at fighting, you really just didn't want to get in front of Lancelot's blade when he got going. So, and another thought that comes to me is like a paladin who is a bully to someone he shouldn't be. Maybe it's the nun at the monastery or a priest at the temple. Something that really deviates away, but it's because he has the warrior-like nature and his job is out to fight. That carries through in the way he treats other people, not necessarily through violence, but just through sort of maybe aggressive speak and that type of stuff. So
I'm actually reminded of Doctor Who. He's got bunches of flaws, or it has bunches of flaws.
I guess you have to say that now.
Since Doctor Who is now a woman, which is fantastic. So
well, if the storytelling is better than the last couple seasons.
But I guess I still say he, because I'm really referring to the David Tennant run. Yeah. And actually the one before that. There was
the one season guy who was really good.
Yeah, he's awesome. Great actor. But weird, just flawed, like some of the stuff that they would do. I mean, the one obvious, very selfish thing is that Doctor Who is lonely. So he selfishly takes companions on these adventures. And a lot of people are like, oh, I would love to be Doctor Who's companion.
No, you don't.
you're constantly in danger. Mm-hmm. It's really like he's picking up a dog. Mm-hmm. Like he is so much more intelligent than a human being is. And though the companions always have something to add, it is just... It's like comparing.
There's definitely a line there that's close to, and even some of his villains have brought it up against him and used it against him at times because they know, and so the companions after a while start to know, and that's usually near the end of a companion's time there. However, it ends up sometimes good or sometimes bad.
Who is what was it? Martha. Martha left because she was like, yeah, I see what's going on here. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to live up to the prior companions. So, she was smart enough to cut her ties. Yeah.
And poor Rose. That was probably the most heartbreaking scene in recent television history for me.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah. No, that Tenet season was probably the best written, I think.
I've gotten away from it. Like I got onto it late. So I was watching it and catching up, and then I lost access to it, and now they released another 12 seasons. So I think the last thing I watched was the second or third, or I was into the third season of the David Tennant run. So I hadn't even finished the David Tennant run.
Oh, okay.
And there's been like 3 Doctors since him. So
yeah, and I really enjoyed the next Doctor. I thought it was, some people didn't like it, but I did. The writing really went downhill after that. So I don't know how this new Doctor is. I haven't seen any. I
really want it to be amazing because I think Jodie Whittaker is fantastic.
The last actor was really good too. And there was just, the stories weren't there like they were when they rebooted it. Okay. So
anyway,
now back to this.
So Flawed Hero. And do you have anything else on Flawed Hero?
Nope.
All right. So what's the next thing?
So know the characters before you start the story. This is, and once again, when I say characters in this episode, I'm talking about your main characters or characters who are really important for a scene. It's so important, and Michael's alluded to this already. You need to know more than you're going to even tell the readers and the writers. Is you need to understand how your character is going to react before you start putting them into story situations. So, like, if there's a character that you don't have your hands around, the less you understand the characters, the more prep work you need to do. Write short stories. Take a few like key moments of their life and flesh them out. Work with them, because once you start writing the story, you need to know your characters. So when you get to that point, you know how they need to choose to get to the end. So you know that you need a scene to change their path because their character will naturally go in the wrong direction, and you need them to start getting back. But you'll know ahead of time you need that scene. You're less likely to get stuck if you know your characters. Plus, it makes it compelling, right? When the character just kind of oozes out of you, the dialogue comes more naturally. Everything about the character comes out better in the story because you know what you expect the character to do. And if you're struggling with that, it's going to show up in your story, and it will take away, it'll be less compelling.
I have a tough time with that sometimes where I have a plan, but then I really start to create really develop the characters, and then they have other things in mind.
Yeah. And that's the reason why, like, if you don't know enough about the character to where you can envision them in your head to come out with the outline, you need to spend more time developing the characters. The irony is, in world building, so often people spend so much time building religions and every aspect of a world in so much detail, and then their characters, they have a few stats for them, or they have a few ideas, like a name and maybe a quick description of the character. But they know if it's a good guy or a bad guy, but they don't necessarily know the character, and that's one of the things I think works really well for me is I see the characters in my head. Maybe that's another flaw, but but it really helps when I'm writing or telling a story, when something that comes at me that I wasn't expecting through the story, I know how to react with the character. I know how to fix it to keep the character on track. And I think the problem is, if you try and develop the character in the story alone, you haven't fleshed it out like you would a country or a religion in your world. To me, that's where you need more information, is on characters, because you need enough to understand them so that you can plan out the scenes to get them from A to B, and B being the climax. So you need to get them there to that point. All of your characters, if you don't understand the important ones, you're going to be one of those writers who are sitting back, either ham-fisting it and forcing a scene in, or forcing them to make a bad decision that the readers won't think would make sense for them. And that hurts and makes the story less compelling. So the better you know your characters up front, the more you can share for them. You'll get a taste of the emotion that they're having at the time, and so you can let that ooze out into the words too. It makes the story richer.
So all of that was knowing the characters before you start, right? You didn't.
Well, and a little bit about short stories there too. And
okay.
I
didn't know. I didn't catch if you actually had said number one or not, so I didn't want to say it and be wrong.
Yep.
Okay.
So
the first one was short stories about their background.
Yep.
Number two is write stories about them interacting with the other main characters.
If they know each other, especially, I said, you need to know how they're gonna interact with each other. If they're friends and their personalities don't mesh, how do they work it out to get it to work? You need to know these kind of things. So if you don't know it, you need to write it out or say it out into like a recorder. However you want to do it. Writing will make you remember it better, though. So you need, if characters especially have a good knowledge of each other, it's another area that you can write around to get a better handle on some characters.
Number three is create stories about them engaging in the environment. Now, with all of these stories, do you intend for these, like if you're doing a novel, do you intend for these to be part of the novel, or are these for you as the world builder?
They could end up being part of it. Like maybe you need a little bit more pulling. You might pull some of it into there. Maybe use it for marketing as you're trying to launch a book, or start to tease out a story. When you plan to start sharing it, you can send out tidbits to get people's appetites whetted for.
It could also be part of the character's history, as you could throw it in as a flashback to establish some depth.
But the more important thing is, though, it's teaching you, and what I'm saying here is you want to get to the point where you know your characters, you know how they interact with each other. Now I don't say don't do that if they're meeting in the story, but if they have a history together, you want to know how they're going to interact with each other before you. So once again, when they get to that important decision parts of your tree, you have reasons why they're following the plot.
All right. So third tip is give time to connect readers to important characters and places.
Yeah. So, I think, and I forget what I was watching. It was very recently, and I apologize. I'm going to reference something I don't know. But my wife and I both watched it, and like they did no character development up front. And it was supposed to be characters you cared about, but they rushed so quickly to get to the action part of the story that you had no reason to give a crap about any of the characters, to think the guy was a great character or not. The problem is, if you want to have emotional impact with characters, to make them compelling, you do need to develop a little bit. And you can do it through scenes in the book, through flashbacks. There are lots of different ways to do that. But you need to actually develop them. You need to take time so people know enough about the characters, so later on when you start throwing stuff at them, it makes sense why they're reacting the way they are. They have to have that flavor in the reader's mind, or the person interacting with you. They have to know enough about the character to understand what's going on. It's kind of like the classic in a role-playing game where they walk in and they meet a super powerful character in a bar, and they say the one word that the character hates, which is the. Like I make a character that hates the word the and will kill anyone who says it. And so the characters come in, he kills the whole group because they say the. And it doesn't make for a fun story. You show off how cool this character is, maybe, but and they learn, and then they metagame the next time they meet the guy to not say the word the. But the thing is, you got to warn the characters and give them some context so the story makes sense, or else they're trying to understand stuff, and that makes it less compelling. When they're trying to piece things together, unless it's a detective story and they're trying to piece the crime solving together, it's not compelling. It's not going to pull them through a story.
The thing that I like about this particular tip is just it's a great reminder that you probably love your characters, and you want your reader to love your characters as much as you do.
Yeah.
But they're not going to, unless you get to unless they get to experience it. So you got to give the reader as much time with the characters as you've had. I mean, you're not going to, because the characters live in your head. So there's that. But you have to give the reader a lot of time. They got to get to know these locations. They got to get to know these characters. I mean, why do you think
they have to have a taste for it before you start using it?
Like, why do you think Firefly has such rabid fans? They did. They had, was it 17 episodes? 14 were aired and 17 total recorded. It's there's not a lot of material there, and then the movie. But people love that show so much because we got a lot of time with Serenity as a place and almost as a character itself. We got a lot of time with all the individual characters, And
that's the important thing too, is the places as well, right? So you develop like communities and cultures and stuff like that, but then you don't highlight it by using it. Like, if the character is going to meet someone that they don't know, a lot of like cultures will have meeting places in the cities or towns. They should be there, and you can get a flavor of what's going on around them as they enter into that scene to meet that person. But that, helps share and make the environment feel alive. Like it's more than just the characters happening. So especially if the place is important, like a spaceship, and like the Serenity itself, you have to be intimately, aware of that space, especially in a sci-fi or a game where it's a very small set. But let them feel the place, or to me too. If you're going to burn a town down, make sure people understand the size and scope of it. Before you blow it up, so they can go, wow. It's really easy in a movie because you can do those pan over shots like in Game of Thrones of the city. And that would be enough to go, oh my goodness, this crazy woman just blew up the freaking half the town. But beyond that is half those people, you also got to interact with, which helps strengthen it. It makes it feel more alive. It helps compel people. The more attachments people can link to in their own life, the more compelling the story is, because they can focus more on what's happening. And my next one is plan out your scenes.
Plan out your scenes.
You need to know all of the characters who are going to be in the scene, if there are any important props, where it's at. These are things you need to know before you write it. And depending on how important the scenery is, will be how much time you spend in each individual thing. But you need to have a feeling of how the movement's flowing through the scene, what's happening. We've talked about this before with like sketching out, sort of like they do for movies, a very basic storyboard of what's going on, so you can understand yourself how the space is being used. If they're inside my room and they bring out like giant two-handed swords and start whacking each other in my house, it wouldn't work because the ceilings aren't high enough. And that kind of stuff will distract people. But if you plan out your scenes, you sit there and go, okay, they're in a place that's boring, but I need it to be more, I need something to set it off. I need to get the tension going faster to help get them through this area more quickly, but that's the kind of stuff that allows you just there and start controlling the tempo and tone of the story, is when you know what's going to happen, and I don't think you need a lot, but before you write it, take at least a few minutes to be able to visualize what's going to happen in the scene. What's the basic gist of the conversation? How's it going to end up in relationship to the story, if it's story or whatever plot it's associated with.
So you want to know the character and the props going into the scene.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that there is a conflict happening in the scene. If you don't have conflict, it's just exposition.
Yeah. But my thing is, exposition can even be done through conflict, right? You want to show off a town.
Absolutely.
Have a thief, pickpocket some random character in the town and be chased. None of the main characters, but it helps introduce an area. It's about, showing it, not telling it, I guess. And the more you can show it and the less you have to tell it, which it's very hard to be 100% showing. Trust me, I struggle with that all the time. I think most people do. But the more you can show it, instead of just say, that's the king's house. Yeah, it is, but it's probably because of all the guards, and there are other reasons that make it, the king's house.
Describe how regal it is.
That's right. The fear in the peasants as they walk past. I've now just shared a detail of the king. They're afraid of him. They're walking by on all fours because he's crazy and he'll strike you down if you don't. That would say something to people get on all fours to walk past the king's front door.
Interesting.
Kind of a weird one.
Interesting idea.
But it's conflict that people like. It's like, you hear news people talk about this all the time. The reason the news is always so negative is because people like conflict. Even if it's just a conversation, even if it's just a mother and a father talking back and forth on how to deal with a kid, there is some kind of conflict. It doesn't have to be physical, but it does have to be a conflict. There should be something to engage the person to go through, and people like conflict. Even in love, it's the conflict of your heart versus exposing yourself to the other person, or getting caught by their father, or whatever it is.
The the third thing you have here is be willing to start closer to the conflict or action in the scene.
Yeah. And I think that's important sometimes too. It's like if all of your scenes follow the formula of you go introduce the scenery, and then you start introducing the characters, and then you have 3,000 words down before you get to the like little conversation that you need. Sometimes just bring it up close to the conversation and have like a lot of visual context going between the characters. Break up the way you tell stuff. Disruption will help people pay attention longer. So, take a scene and time-wise slow it down, but make every look, every word important, and just play with stuff and do it differently. But like you don't always have to start out and have the people walk in and sit down together at the table. Sometimes you just start with them sitting at the table across from each other. And now, finally, the fifth point here is do not use exposition to catch readers up. I think it's the wrong way to do it. And I know it's really hard in fantasy and science fiction to completely get away from it. But, don't start off with a whole chapter of narration telling me about the rise of the evil king to the west and, and how he already has this massive army and is ready to take over the continent. Have a scene where they're playing it out and they're talking about having the last thing they need with some kind of conflict going on, something engaging, because if it's strict exposition, it's boring. And that's just the way I think about it. I do think small stories, let's see, interview exposition as you introduce characters. Yeah. The correct way to introduce a character is have them caught up by a guard. Who are you? What are you doing here?
Come with me.
Come with me. Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to throw you in prison, and I'm going to introduce you to the prison. Yay. And that's for like blowing up the babies in the other scene. So, probably don't love orphanages. That might be considered overkill. But, once again, very quickly, the 5 main tips: more depth to your characters. Add nuances, even small little things, to let people latch on to something positive or negative about the character, to help show them important information. Like if the character has leadership skills, have it come through in the way they interact with people instead of just saying that they have leadership skills. Now, 2 is know your characters before you start the story. Really have a good idea of how they're going to react throughout the story so you don't get caught off, going down the wrong path and having to replot out your book halfway through. Or if later on during editing, they're like, cut the whole scene out, you're like, oh crap, how do I weave it together still?
Like I still need it to go in this direction, but that scene is what put it on this course.
Exactly.
So now I need to stick something in there that will put it on that course,
Yeah. We'll make the character a dog. What? But they talk throughout the whole book.
Exactly.
That'd be a hard difference. It's a talking dog. Kids will love it.
Kids love talking dogs.
Number 3, give time for the readers to connect to characters and places. Especially the smaller the set is, the more time they need to become familiar with it.
And that one kind of lends well into the last one where you talk about like small stories. I love a small story. Like I don't need every story to be about the saving of the universe. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that I feel that is done to death. Mm-hmm. Like, don't get me wrong. Some of them are done amazingly and they're still pleasant to watch or read or experience in a video game every single time. But I also feel that it's been familiar. It's a familiar trodden path. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. The 4th one is plan out your scenes. And the 5th one is don't use exposition just to catch people up to where the story's starting. If you need that much exposition, you're either starting the story in the wrong spot, or you can do something like interviews or small stories, small scenes to introduce them to where they're going to start. It's the scene of the father being murdered trying to save his children so they can escape, and then you're going to pick up the kids 30 years later. But instead of saying that happened, just have a scene of the father getting killed. It'll start the book off at a fast pace, and you can start slipping in some of the world building details to people along the way.
So sad.
Yes, so sad.
Poor Ned Stark. Come join us on Facebook. Come say hi to Jeff and me in the World Builders, Fantasy World Builders Undercroft.
Yes.
And a bunch of people have joined lately. And Jeff, it's about time to retire because we now have a Tiberius in the group. How awesome is that? So Tiberius is joined by a bunch of other people that we'll want to shout out. William, Chris, Justin, Janice, Kevin, Varick, Evan, Raymond, Josh, and Robert just joined today.
Woohoo! Thank you, Robert. And now for all you world builders out there, your task for the day is to start delivering a story to someone else. It could be your kid. It could be your spouse, even though they might punch you after a while. Hopefully not. But
your spouse is tough. I think she's she's in the minority on this one.
Well, she'll. No, I'm not going to even go there. She would never. Let's see. But share it with just someone else. Even if it's just the idea of what the story is. Start getting feedback, especially if you're worried about it being compelling. The only way to really know is to ask other people. You are going to be the worst judge on how compelling your story is. Until you have the confidence, until you have a few under your belt and you can do it. So especially the more novice you are, get a writing buddy or something just to throw ideas off of to get feedback. And now for the real world task of the day is, delivering stories takes practice. So use short stories. And this is the thing that always people I don't know if I can write a complete, just write a story from start to finish. Don't worry about word length. Your first thing you write down is probably not going to be a novel you even want to publish. But start practicing saying, telling, writing, whatever the medium is, you have to start doing it and completing it to start getting better at it. So even if it's not the best thing, even if you never go back to it because it really wasn't as good as you thought it was, you're not going to get better if you don't go through the process. And starting a book 50 times, you can get really good at starting the book, but that's not doing it. If you want to write books, you got to write lots of words down many times. If you want to write video games, try making them. If they're no good, they're no good. You're not doing this for a living at this point. But you need practice to get better. Now, as you get better, each time, just take a moment and think back about what you can improve upon to do better or faster next time.
My wife and I went away this past weekend, and she surprised me. We brought some games with us, as we are wont to do. And we played this for the first time. We have Rory's Story Cubes. It's a little baggie of 9 dice, and on every side of every die there's a different icon. And you roll them and then you make up a story. And she surprised me that she wanted to play, so we had a blast with that.
Sounds like a real fun way to just practice telling stories.
It was and it was it was a fun bonding experience, and it was a fun creative experience, and it's a very inexpensive purchase. So I would recommend to work on just your off-the-cuff storytelling. Go get yourself a copy of Rory's Story Cubes. Very inexpensive little game. It's just a little bag of dice.
All right, folks. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike. where the myth was hot.